So you've had a sort of a long sort of path to this moment, and now you guys are looking at a much broader sort of path forward. I guess, two things. One, for folks that are kind of following in your footsteps, what are kind of the critical things to think about? And then I guess my follow-on question after that is going to be, what do you see from here? What are the things that,
Sure.
that you're sort of seeing your path after this?
So the question for us, everybody here, one thing I can tell that I have in common with all of you is you've all lived through or in the final stages of a Windows migration. Anybody not, right? If you raise your hand, you're lying, or you have a different responsibility than mine, that's fine. I can accept either of those answers. But if I take a look at what's coming in the future, there's a lot of discussion about bring your own device. Obviously, in the world, there's a lot of discussion about working everywhere. And I see that right now, as I was thinking about this session, what I really see is this incredible blurring happening of the boundaries between devices. So again, it only makes sense in terms of constituencies. So if you think about the folks at your organization who, candidly do the real work. In our case, they're making claims happen, they're answering customer calls, they're in the front lines. For those people, a device strategy that's a fixed device strategy makes sense. It's going to be, and standardization makes sense. And then you kind of have the rest of the world where we have a lot of users today who rarely touch a keyboard, who are actually finding ways to do much of their work on an iPad and will touch a keyboard when they have to, or they'll use another tablet device. And if I take a look at what's happening in the future as people go through kind of this bring your own device world, what you do to support bring your own device, at least from my perspective, is you really move toward a virtualization kind of environment and persist where we need to, right? So if you take a look at where Good fits in that, Good allows us to persist email in a container we trust. I don't think you can get away from persisting email. I think the expectations are too high. I think even though we now have GoGo on aircraft, right? And today I flew here and I used GoGo the whole way and thought again of how it would have been had I had to, say, drive to New York for 20 hours. Instead, I could be petulant about the fact that GoGo's slow. Just how much the world has changed.
Is that what we're doing?
Right, exactly. So we have that sort of kind of span, but for certain things, and email is one of them, virtualization isn't enough. You have to persist it. Beyond that, the next question is how can you virtualize? And how can you virtualize everything from access to SharePoint, access to the company's web, and then how do you make sure the access to web is consistent enough? And then ultimately, do you get into a full virtualization, a desktop kind of virtualization for first set of words, or for a certain set of capabilities? You put all that together, and what's interesting is what is necessary to do an effective bring your own device through virtualization looks a lot like the also best practices to have a very secure frontier within your environment. Virtual access is inherently more secure than physical access. I think most of us are thinking in terms of security as there's no such thing as a trusted device. So as I take a look at how bring your own devices is likely to evolve within my company, I think it's more likely to be organic, than it is to be planned from top down. So in our environment, we essentially have a parallel network that is a network that has no trust with an organization that we call the M network. It stands for mobile, that you can connect to with a mobile device. Without us really telling people, or without us really having a program, that has become the place people connect to with their iPads, which then we don't have to whitelist anything, and then they use Good for email, and now they use Good for access to our web. And I can see that the slow and steady, as we have more capability into personal devices, including laptops. I'd love to have a secure container for email and laptops. That you'll see kind of an organic thing happen on the bring your own device kind of environment where people will self-select into it so long as they have sufficient virtual or secure persisted access to the resources they need. And then with that will come, again, in my opinion, increasing virtualization on the desktop to the point where hopefully the next kind of great desktop migration will be meaningless. And what I mean is that the current standardized desktop strategy where people just moved from usually Windows XP to Windows 7, I don't know many people who did Vista on the way, but that may be the last great desktop migration, but because between now and the end of Windows 7, access may be virtual, and because it's virtual, it can be less trusted. And because it's virtual, what's on the other end in terms of what's on the device will matter less. So I see the move to mobility and tools, frankly, like Good, as a reinforcing capability that will allow us to persist what's necessary to persist, keep everything else virtual, and let the bring your own device, or really the non-standardized device, because bring your own device is really a subset of non-standardized device, future happen to a degree organically until it reaches a tipping point and becomes a strategy, which is probably somewhere in the next 3 to 6 years.
I hadn't actually thought of that. For many organizations, Windows 7 being the last major OS upgrade. I'm shocked that we don't hear a whoop in the room after that one. That would be like could you imagine if we combined all of the dollars spent on that migrate across all of the companies that are in this room right now?
Right.
The vacation we could all have.
Now, I will say in a little bit in their defense, one thing that they have been great about is extremely long lives. They've just been very, very honorable about long lives, but the transition is brutal.
Yeah, it has been. All right, so part of the value of us all being together is to kind of be able to kind of share information from one another. So if it's okay with you, I might see if anyone out in the audience has a question.
Yes, but there's 2 people here that are on my team. They
that
can't
are not
ask
allowed to
questions,
ask the question.
but I can defer them to them. So.
Does anyone else have a question for Mike? Don't let the bar after this session deter you. Okay.
You mentioned using BYOD for your kind of frontline workers, the heads down ones, using BYOD to give them access to their personal lives during work. Could you explain more of that?
So for a variety of reasons, there are things we block on our corporate network. And again, understand we're under a very specific and a very strong regulatory environment that is also a patchwork of regulations across many states, 2 of which, for example, make it impossible for us to have unencrypted USB devices on our drives. So we have a very complicated environment from just sort of a regulatory standpoint, and we take the regulation seriously as well as protecting 70 million people, which is the total population of Americans that we have data on in our environment, very seriously. Within that context, we made a decision that for our employees, there are some things they're not able to get to on our corporate network. But what we've done is we've created a parallel network, which is not connected to our corporate network, that allows them to connect their personal device and get access to those things. So like a Facebook or a YouTube or some other things that for a variety of reasons, under most circumstances, we don't have our corporate network. That has been fascinating to me to watch that turn into a default work network.
Yeah.
Because we don't want, we don't want to manage to have to whitelist iPads by MAC address to have them have access to our network. So instead, you're allowed with essentially your regular credentials to go on the parallel network, but then you can use Good to do your email. And now you can also use Good to get onto the company websites. And ultimately, the plan is to get to SharePoint, to do some other things. Right? That is already causing our parallel mobile network to grow at a, frankly, slightly alarming rate. We had some issues associated with that. But that's the thing that's made me see that's made me conclude that if we continue to enrich the tool set, that bring your own device, that shift to a blended device, that shift to a, frankly, iPad with a keyboard is very common. We're also seeing people use some of the Windows tablets, I think are taking off at a pretty high rate of speed. That will happen organically. We don't need to make it happen. People will still give them PCs. They'll use it for some things, but people will self-select into that. But again, I divide that into the group of folks who are heads down doing real work, because again, I haven't done real work in about 25 years, but there's a lot of people in our company who do. They do the real work that really serves people. They're typically using a company device directly, but if they want to use their mobile device to do something personal through our mobile network, that's great. That allows them to have that access. It's sort of a plus for them. It just turns out that same thing is very useful for the propagation of a bring your own device. My iPad is now my primary device mentality among knowledge workers.
Well, it's another example, actually, of we oftentimes refer to the different security technologies where we talk about securing the perimeter, right? So we think of MDM as the perimeter being around the device, and container as the perimeter being around the application or the set of applications in the framework. And so, it's interesting, rather than setting the perimeter around the network and blacklisting and whitelisting at the network level, you're solving it on a much more granular level. That's
so what we do is we try to,
analogy.
bring your own device will happen outside of my core network. That's
Yeah.
why you have to have virtualization. That's why you have to have a secure sandbox in order to persist in.
And you're seeing the growth because users are opting in? This is user-driven?
Yes.
Interesting.
Ron, you
Okay.
agree, right? See, he's the guy who knows everything. So, yeah.
All right.
Did you build a business case for this investment? And if so, what kind of returns are you observing?
No, we didn't. The reason is it's just not that expensive. The things we're careful of doing things like the QoS settings for the non-internal network are radically smaller, so we can squeeze it to a small pipe, so it isn't that expensive. Typically, if you've bought any sort of network device in the last few years, you've bought a device that can do VLAN security. So we really didn't go through a formal, at least as far as I know. If we did, it didn't get to me, but we didn't go through a real form. We didn't really need to. There are things. It's one of the things that's fun in our jobs is sometimes you can create a service improvement that just comes along with the ride of a change, and boy, it's upsetting when you don't take advantage of that. And that was a case where we were able to do that.
Excellent. Another question?
Follow-up to that question, are you measuring any metrics, for example, performance improvements or time to market, those kind of things, or before and after?
So we will, in terms of our implementation of good, I'm just going to say no, because what we've determined is that we believe that having people be able to extend their workplace to being mobile is, if you will, as obvious as the fact that they should have a PC, right? I mean, it's just, you really don't have a business case in terms of knowledge workers as to whether they have a PC. When it gets to specific mobile investments, then absolutely we do. When we're looking at creating something for a set of nurses who are doing at-home visits, absolutely the investment that we do is subject to a very specific business case. Or if you look at but again, if you look at the way we serve our external constituencies, there's a lot that we do just because it's in the spirit of good customer service. It's in the spirit of serving our customers the way they want to be served. It also turns out generally to have a very powerful business case because a web transaction is a fraction of the cost of a telephone call, and because happy customers are loyal customers. But there's a real range between that which we do kind of simply because it makes sense. I can't imagine an environment where we say we don't want to be able to have people get access to their email 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. I can think of a lot of people who wish they didn't, but from the standpoint, as an enterprise, I can't imagine that we wouldn't want to do that.
All right.
Hi, I had a question in the back. Mike, I have a question regarding the future and also with your customers directly. Can you see a future where potential patients have a mobile device and are communicating with your organization and might have a need for some type of mobile security in doing that in the future?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. What do you mean by mobile security?
I'm thinking about, having conversations maybe with your provider about the necessary need for maybe a procedure or for something, and you want to have some type of direct reach with them.
Sure.
So privacy, HIPAA, just things like that.
So those things already exist today. Our primary businesses are really serving the healthcare industry, both as an insurer and as a services company. We do have some clinics, and we do have some people who are direct providers. And those channels already exist today, and there are already substantial amount of very secure communication going on between people who are receiving care and people who are providing care. So that exists today. And there are very specific regulations under HIPAA, under ARA, and under ACA regarding those kind of communications. And it's funny, if you go, if you go to your doctor, I'm sure some of you, don't raise your hand, but I'm sure some of you have emailed with your doctor. Your doctor's not supposed to do that. But the fact is there are secure communications available, and we do use them.
I'd like to know if in BYOD has it given you any pause for concern with state laws around your employees using personal devices and you having to reimburse them for using a personal device?
I have, that issue has not come up. Typically, for one thing, we are not going to require, I think that comes up primarily if you require the employee to buy a device, but I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on much, but especially not on state laws. But we do not require employees ever to buy a device, and we do provide a primary PC for not every employee in the company, because there's some for which they're not relevant, but for the vast majority of employees, we provide devices.
Yeah. I can, I would say we can sit down and absolutely have a conversation about what we see across the customer base in that respect. And interestingly, I think some of the very interesting conversations are also in Europe and overseas, where we have a lot of customers who are doing multi-tier mobility strategies. For this set of users, having a mobile device is a function of your job, and the company's buying you a device and paying for the data. For this group of users, we never bought you a device, so we're not replacing, but if you want one, we'll make one available, and here's the program. And then there's sort of the folks who, it has absolutely nothing to do with your job, but it's the employee who's actually requesting it. And what's interesting, country by country, and I would imagine state by state, the regulatory, the conversations are less about technology and almost all about HR and legal and benefits, and if I was giving you this, now I have to give you that, or and I'm sure many of you saw the conversations around what happens if you give somebody a mobile device in France and they read an email after work hours, what happens then? I mean, so some of the really interesting conversations are happening that have absolutely nothing to do with technology. We have some customers who are asking us whether we can block service during certain hours of the day so that they don't have users accidentally working. Okay, you know what? No good employees will have their...
Yeah,
we don't block any hours are good.
And I think for us, the reason that hasn't come up is very simple. We do provide our employees the tools they need to do their job. Vast majority of our employees don't actually need a mobile device, and they provide their own to extend their job.
Exactly.
But the ones that need them, we provide them.
One last question if there is one, and if not. All right, well, thank you again, both for joining us at this event, but also for your partnership and support. And I'm certain you'll hopefully join for a few moments to
Absolutely.
have a beverage or meet a couple of the folks. And just before we depart the stage, I want to thank all of you for coming. I know Lynn has a few final words, but thank you so much for sharing your day with us and for being a part of the conversation. So.